mentioned the Marines at Abbey Gate, and what we've undertaken at this department is a historic Afghanistan review. So we have, over the course of months, reviewed what happened leading up to and including the events at Abbey Gate and the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan. There's never actually been a full accounting in this department of the decisions that were made. There's been sort of papered over congressional attempts, but never a real deep dive where we brought everybody in to talk about what happened and why it happened. That has happened. That review will come later this summer, and I think you'll find it to be probably the most comprehensive review this department has ever done about a single series of events. And it's because the cascading effect of what Joe Biden did in abandoning that mission the way that he did, and that disastrous withdrawal had ripple effects for our military, for our country, and for the world. That's why reestablishing deterrence is one of the core pillars of what we've been doing at the War Department, because the world looked at that disaster and made choices. Vladimir Putin made choices. Hamas made choices and saw that America wouldn't do anything about it. Houthis shot at ships. They made choices because Joe Biden and his administration were seen as feckless and weak. And that withdrawal was a part of what the world saw. People hanging to planes as we fled. That deserves a full accounting, which is exactly what we're doing. Sean Parnell, our chief spokesman, one of my senior advisors, has been leading that effort, getting to the bottom of it. And one of the revelations was that those Marines at Abbey Gate who showed courage, who were out there exposed, knew there was a threat, nebulous mission, the only gate that's open, did not receive the kind of proper recognition they should have for their heroism. So one of the early results of this Afghan review is to ensure they get the due recognition and award they deserve for the heroism and courage they showed at that gate. Despite the bad decisions of this building and that administration, those Marines acted heroically, and we're going to recognize them for that. Sure, thank you. Yeah, right here.
Thank you. Michael Casey with O'Keefe Media Group. Earlier this week, James O'Keefe published a story on Department of Army Nuclear Chief Andrew Hugg, who revealed top secret national security information to a stranger he met on a dating app. Will you defer Mr. Hugg for termination and prosecution?
Yeah, he won't work here anymore.
And given the revelations, will
an easy one.
Will any changes be made to the current anti-espionage training for all Department of War employees now, given this?
Well, we're always on the lookout for CI threats, any internal threats, anyone talking out of school about things they should not. We take leaking very seriously here, informally or formally, which is why some of the reporting done by some of the people in here is incredibly problematic. They're willing to publish things based on classified information that would potentially harm those in harm's way, and we think them doing so is incredibly irresponsible and unpatriotic. And it would encourage members of the press to think twice about the lives they're affecting when they publish things in their publications like the New York Times. Yes, right here.
Was the Tuska carrying used equipment to China?
Sure. So I'm sorry, the question's right here.
Thank you. Ryan Morgan with the Epic Times. Earlier this week, on that topic, there was a report, I believe, with the Washington Post that the Pentagon had briefed Congress that it could take up to 6 months to fully sweep the Strait of Hormuz for mines. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit more on the specifics of the timeline, the range of time that it could take, and then just a general idea of how many mines have been placed.
We would not speculate on a timeline. I saw that report. It was based on, again, another leak from a closed-door session, which was supposed to be classified, and apparently, allegedly, that was something that was said about we feel confident in our ability in the correct period of time to clear any mines that we identify. And would encourage other countries to be a part of such an effort as well, but we're tracking that very closely. Mr. Chairman, do you want to add anything to that?
No, sir. I think you covered it.
Right here, new members of our press corps here.
Jacob Wasserman with TMZ DC. We have two questions. I'm going to ask the first, and my colleague will ask the second. You know, I've heard you talk a lot about bombing.
We'll see.
Sorry?
We'll see.
Okay. I've heard you talk a lot about bombing people, places, and when you give these orders to carry out this extreme level of violence, what's going through your mind and your body? Do you have like an adrenaline rush? Are you scared? Do you feel like you're on a power trip? Just walk us through and paint us a picture of what it feels like mentally and physically.
It's a very TMZ question. My only thought process is to ensure that our warfighters have everything they need to be successful, defeat and destroy the enemy, and they come home. I want them to feel empowered, to have every authority they need within our rules and within our law to bring maximum violence to the enemy. Because because war is violent, war requires doing difficult things, but I want our people to feel empowered, so it's our guys that come home and their guys that do not. Sure, I'll give you one chance.
Charlie Cotton from Teams EDC. You changed the Department of Defense to the Department of War. Would you consider changing the name again to the Department of Peace, since that's what we're all after?
Well, that's the pursuit. It's a great question, actually. You go from defense to war because you want to be proactive about peace through strength. And really, I gave a speech in front of generals about what the ethos of the War Department is all about, because I wanted to go through every echelon of this department. It means something. It's not just words. And when you fight a war the right way, the idea is on the other side you bring about peace. That is what we'd like to see the most. In fact, I once did a video about the one institution that should win the Nobel Peace Prize every single year is the United States military, because we are the guarantor of the safety and security of not just of our country, but of a lot of people in this world. Last question. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I do appreciate your time. Since February 28, 725 drones and missiles have hit the Kurdistan region as your loyal ally, killing 22 people and injuring 100 others. Even after the ceasefire, Mr. Secretary, 20 more attacks were carried out. My question is, does that ceasefire include Iraq and the Kurdistan region? And really, what is your clear policy toward proxies? Why I am asking this question, by President Masoud Barzani's statement, 5 times targeting his office, even targeting President of Kurdistan region residents in the Hock City.
We watch it very closely, and that area and those folks, the Kurds, deal with a lot of what the IAMGs or the proxies are capable of doing, and a reminder of the reverberating effect of this Iranian regime. It's not just what it does to its own people, killing 45,000 of its own citizens just recently, but it's also the terror they've brought to the region.
Starting a second full read. We haven't finished our other one. A new pair of glasses. Yeah, we were doing a full read on that one. We were about halfway through for this reading. And then we're going to start The Covenant and the Kingdom. It's a really good book. I would suggest it, yes, so probably across the board there for you guys. I think all of you would like this one. I'm going to start it. You can listen in if you want. The Covenant and the Kingdom. A Way Through the Old Testament, Part 2. Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings by Joseph Reimer. Plapham Press, Dayton, Ohio, 1968. First published in 1968. Sheedon Ward, 33 Maiden Lane, London, and Sheedon Ward, 95 York Street in Sydney. 1968 by Joseph Reimer. Library of Congress Catalog Card Number 68-22895. To Anthony and Ruth Humphreys. Introduction. From 1146 to 945 BC, there is a gap in the Egyptian records of their conquests and activities in Palestine and the Lebanon. From 1076 to 833 BC, there is a gap in the Assyrian accounts of their campaigns in the same area at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. The two gaps overlap by a period of just over 130 years, 1076 to 945 BC. There would be nothing remarkable about this if it were not for one fact which finds no mention in any of the Egyptian or Assyrian documents that have so far been discovered. Between 1030 and 931 BC, the Hebrew people changed their form of government from a loose federation of scattered tribes to a highly organized monarchy, and carved out an empire which controlled or dominated the whole area from the Lebanese mountains to the Egyptian border. This book is about three kings, Saul, David, and Solomon, who occupied the Hebrew throne during those years. Although there is no mention of the Hebrew people in the records of the great powers of the time, all the accounts mention one area of interest, insignificant at first sight, but sufficient to enable our minds to bridge the gaps between the nations and to obtain a point of entry into their lives. The Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser I, who lived from 1114 to 1076 BC, records, "I went to the Lebanon and cut timber of cedars for the temple of Anu and Adad, the great gods, my lords, and carried them to Ashur." A-S-H-U-R, Ashur. And the first Assyrian king after the gap, Ashurnasirpal II, who lived from 883 to 859 BC, records, "I seized the entire extent of the Lebanon mountain and reached the great sea of the Amurru country, the Mediterranean. I cleaned my weapons in the deep sea and performed sheep offerings to the gods. I ascended the mountains of the Amanus, the range to the north of the Lebanon, and cut down logs of cedar for the construction of the sanctuary for the temples of Sin and Shamash, the light-giving gods." And this is in Pictard, Ancient Near Eastern Text, Princeton University Press, 1955. The same theme runs in the Egyptian text, 351 pieces of cedar slabs, beams, and logs for the temples at Thebes, Memphis, and various less important places. David and Solomon obtained their cedar by trade agreements and the gifts of courtesy between kings, but it nevertheless puts them in the same picture as the powers whose reputations are so much more impressive. Hiram, king of Tyre, the main city of the Lebanon at this time, sent envoys to David with cedar wood and carpenters and stonemasons, who built David a palace. And Hiram sent warriors to Solomon. "I have received your message. For my part, I will supply all you want in the way of cedar wood and juniper. Your servants will bring these down from Lebanon to the sea, and I shall have them towed by sea to any place you name. I shall discharge them there, and you will take them over. For your part, you will see to the provisioning of my household as I direct." So Hiram provided Solomon with all the cedar wood and juniper he wanted, while Solomon gave him 20,000 cores of wheat to feed his household and 20,000 cores of pure oil. Solomon gave Hiram this every year. We may have to treat the quantities mentioned with a certain amount of caution, for a core was 100 gallons, but there is no need to doubt the existence of the trade agreement. The root problems of government are the same everywhere, and at all times, the relationship between the individual and the organization, between the bureaucratic structure and the people, when the government is an avowed theocratic, which claims to rule in the name of God, and the theology is one which places an infinite value on the person of the individual citizen, the experiences of failure and the success become relevant and important to our own situation. But in addition, the concepts formed during this period of David and Solomon, concepts of kingship, wisdom, prophecy, and the implications of the covenant between God and his people, were used to penetrate into the mystery of the redemptive activity of God and the climax this activity reached in the life and work of Jesus Christ. There are concepts which we still turn to in our theology, the liturgy, and our personal devotions. They were used by the people who crowded around Jesus Christ as he entered Jerusalem in triumph at the beginning of the week before his death and resurrection. And those who went in front and those who followed were all shouting, "Hosanna! Blessings on him who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessings on the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest heavens." They record the beginning of the most solemn moments of the Mass, and we use them whenever we pray. Lord, have mercy. We can gain much by exploring the period when the concepts were coined. Kersham, Christmas of 1967. Chapter 1. Canaan, the Promised Land. Just before it reaches Haifa, where the ridge of Mount Carmel juts into the sea, one branch of the Great Coast Road points inland to the northeast. If you have traveled up the road, you have already passed through towns, or the remains of towns, which have been there for more than 4,000 years. For this is the ancient road from Egypt to another main cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, and it keeps as close to the sea as the shifting sand and patches of salt swamp will permit. The fork in the road below Haifa climbs over the ridge of Mount Carmel and drops into the valley of Jezreel. Less than 12 miles away, on the far side of the valley, is Nazareth, and to the right the land falls away into the valley of the river Jordan. But the main center of interest is the isolated, flat-topped hill which stands to the left of the road on the edge of the ridge you have just passed over, for this is the remains of a town where over 20 separate layers of occupation have been uncovered. It is Megiddo, the guardian fortress of the valley of Jezreel, the stronghold which protected a whole complex of little villages and which provided a well-provisioned shelter to which the local people could flee when enemies flooded into their valley. When the Hebrews crossed the Jordan and infiltrated the land which they claimed God had given to them, Megiddo was one of the towns already ancient, which they failed to take over for several generations. On the top of the hill at Megiddo, you stand on the debris of many different peoples who have occupied this site in their turn and built on the leveled ruins of those who had occupied it before them. The archaeologists of our own times who have excavated the site and told us the story of the city's history have left sections of their work open. The most impressive part of the ruins is a great complex of the gateway and the massive walls which stretch out from it. The huge blocks of stone breathe an air of complex assurance of a people proud of their achievement and security, and confident of their ability to maintain it. For this is just one of the many places which Solomon fortified and used as a provincial center for the administration of his kingdom, just as the medieval kings of England made their presence felt throughout the country with a network of castles. King Solomon raised a levy throughout Israel for forced labor. The levy numbered 30,000 men. Solomon also had 70,000 porters and 80,000 quarrymen in the mountains, as well as the administrators, officials who supervised the work, 3,300 of them in charge of the men employed in the work. And at the king's orders, they quarried huge stones. This is an account of the forced labor King Solomon levied for the building of the temple of Yahweh, his own palace, the Milo, and the wall of Jerusalem, Hazor, Megiddo, Gezer, Lower Beth, Haran, Baalath, Tamar, in the wilderness, inside the country, all the garrison towns owned by Solomon, all the towns for his chariots and horses, and all it pleased Solomon to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and in all the countries subject to him. Later generations of Hebrews looked back to these times as the peak of their national glory, and their religious hope centered on the restoration of the kingdom which David created and Solomon consolidated. The ancient kingdom of David and Solomon was an achievement whose effects can still be felt in our own times, for it is one of the main forces which have entered into the creation of the modern state of Israel. Yet it was only a minor, insignificant kingdom by secular historical standards, even in terms of the history of its own times. Its brief achievements were only possible because of the temporary weakness of the great powers which surrounded it. And when those powers recovered their strength, it was overwhelmed by them. At the southern end of the coast road was Egypt. Egypt was the river Nile, and the river Nile was Egypt, so much so that the river gives a unity and continuity to an enormously wide range of history. In any other situation, the historian of Egypt would become the history of many different cultures and peoples. At the time of David and Solomon, some of the pyramids were already nearly 2,000 years old, and the great rock tombs which became the fashion after the period of the pyramids were equally impressive memorials to the greatness of their times. But the physical characteristics of the Nile divided the people even while it gave them what unity they possessed, for it created two distinct kinds of conditions for life. In Upper Egypt, the river winds its narrow way, without any tributary, through more than 1,000 miles of desert, giving fertility to a narrow thread of land on either side, where the irrigation canals can reach, and offering on its waters the only means of transport and communication. The city of Thebes, 150 miles downstream from the first of the cataracts which hinder navigation, was the main center for this long strip of civilization. And when the power lay in Upper Egypt, it was the capital of the country. But as the river nears the sea, it runs into the great bulge which it has pushed out into the Mediterranean. The delta formed by the silt in the river has carried with it, and here its waters split into many channels which fan out over an area 200 miles long and 100 miles wide, as the river finds its way to the sea. Half as wide as it is long. Right. Here, there were a number of cities whose importance changed with the political tide and with the shifting of the main river channels. Tanis, Pi Ramesses, Pi Besses, Heliopolis, which became capitals, or at least major royal residences, when the people of the Delta area were dominant. During the time of Abraham and the Hebrew patriarchs, Egypt's influence had dominated the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. For 150 years, from about 1725 to 1575 BC, Egypt had been ruled by foreign Asiatic kings, the Hyksos, or shepherd kings,
who set up their capital at Avaris in the northeast part of the Nile Delta. The native Egyptians of Upper Egypt were reluctant to accept this humiliation, despite an agreement which divided Egypt between the Theban rulers and the Hyksos at Avaris, and the Theban pharaoh Kamosi started the war, which his successors, Amos the First and Thutmose the First, carried to complete victory against the Hyksos, Hyksos. The way was open for the establishing Theban rule again, more strongly than ever throughout Palestine and Syria, and there is a vividly detailed description of the campaigns, including the capture of Megiddo, carved on the temple walls at Karnak. Despite the fears of his army commanders, Thutmose III led his army through the narrow pass where the branch of the coast road climbs across the ridges of Mount Carmel. It took 700 hours for the whole army to cover the 6 miles, but the defendants of Megiddo lost the opportunity presented to them, and the Egyptians took the city. If the Egyptians had maintained their supremacy during the following centuries, the pattern of Hebrew history would have been very different, but a new pressure from outside and internal troubles forced the Egyptians to concentrate on the defense of Egypt itself without attempting to hold her foreign provinces. The main pressure seems to have been the result of the waves of migrations which swept in from the steppes of what is now Russia. People who were already settled were pushed further on, and some of them took to the sea. The pharaohs Meneptah and Ramesses III both repelled fierce attacks on Egypt by the peoples of the sea, and there is a full account of the fierce battles Ramesses III fought on the Delta coast. I have prepared the river melts like a strong wall with warships, galleys, and coasters fully equipped, for they were manned completely from bow to stern with valiant warriors carrying their weapons. The troops consisted of every picked man of Egypt. They were like lions roaring upon the mountaintops. The chariots consisted of runners and picked men of every good and capable chariot warrior. The horses were quivering in every part of their bodies, prepared to crush the foreigners under their hooves. I was the valiant god of war, standing fast at their head, so that they might gaze upon whom my hands captured. Those whom came forward together on the sea, the full flame was in the front of them at the river mouths, while a stockade of lances confronted them on the shore. They were dragged in, enclosed, and posturated on the beach, killed and laid in heaps from tail to head. Their ships and their goods were as if fallen into the water. Was it from the ancient Near Eastern text? Yeah. The early years of the reign of Merneptah, are the most attractive period for placing the exodus of the Hebrew slaves from Egypt and the journey around the Sinai Peninsula and up the eastern side of the Dead Sea before entering Palestine, opposite Jericho. Although Egypt repelled the peoples of the sea, she never recovered sufficient strength to assert her control over Palestine again, for the growth and power of the Theban priest, Theban, the ban of the Ban priest, led to civil war, which left Egypt weakened beyond recovery of her former greatness. What? It's like Taliban? Yeah, looking at the history, probably because some ties there. David and Solomon had the fortune to live just as far as area. You see how there's
like the separation in time, which is kind of names and attachments to certain areas. Yeah, exactly. And then how those kind of generational rifts or histories people in the present can use. Right, as ways to sway the people. Different beliefs, yeah, when you start getting into praising God or Allah, or putting false beliefs or false senses of security into things that don't really exist. Yeah, that kind of goes into a deeper discussion where one would say, simply thoughts can conjure up feelings of sadness, anger, laughter, can take away my pain. Was there any pain to ease? It took your mind off something else. That's better. Right, and then some might say, okay, I need to take something to ease this. Now I have hunger pains. Right, so we know you have to eat something, right? Or get your mind off of it. Right, you're not around food, you have 2 more hours left on your shift, you're gonna have to get your mind off it. Right, maybe you got a granola bar in your pocket, I don't know. But I mean, if you're in a situation where you have to get through for a few hours, I mean, in your mind, you know, as soon as I get out of here, I'm gonna make myself a steak. I'm gonna go get a burger, salad, whatever it is. You know, you have that in your mind, and that helps you kind of get through that last 2 hours of work. Now, if it was a longer duration, or I mean, you don't know if you're gonna be able to get food. There's no more food. I mean, you probably will frig work that I'm not going to work, right? I mean, it totally changes the situation. Right, why am I going to stand here working if I got to worry about when my next meal's going to come? Right, because money's not the issue. Right, there's other issues at hand. There's a shortage of food supplies. Yeah, did you miss that part? No, not really. No, we have abundance. We have more than enough. There's so much waste. Yeah? So many hungry mouths and so much waste. What do we do? Try to profit from their suffering. Wow. You people, really still? What is the matter with you? Yeah, insane. So yeah, I mean, it's like anything, right? Oh, I got a kink in my shoulder, a bit of a pain. I know what to do for that. A nice steamy shower, do some yoga, stretches, drink some tea. Again, you might not be able to do all of that. You're at work. Give me some freaking aspirin, get me whatever else, right? Or just get your mind off of it. You're just gonna not think about it. You're gonna get through. This all happens. All of these things are things people do every day. And they get through. Right, now it would be just a matter of, now someone try to say, no, you have to. If you have hunger pains, you have to eat a burger. I'd rather have a granola bar for right now, thanks. I think a burger would be too much, actually, because I haven't eaten in a while, and if I eat too much, then I get a stomach ache, so I'm just going to have a little something. No, you have to eat a burger. Lady, if you don't get away from me. No, seriously, I mean, I'm not a violent person. But if you try to force feed me, physically put your hands on me and try to shove that burger in my mouth. Right? Or maybe, you know, they start making mandates. Food pyramids and all this shit. Can't have can't have any pudding if you don't eat your meat. Right, you see what I mean though, right? So, we know the hunger pains are real. And eating something, we can all agree, eating something might help with that. Or getting your mind off, I mean, whatever situation, you gotta go by the situation, right? If you see somebody is not in a situation to be able to eat something and you know they gotta stick it out for another half hour or an hour, just try to get your mind off it. I'll sing you a song, right? But if there's food all around him and it's an option, that'd probably be the go-to right here. Have some potatoes. Right, now if you're trying to enforce it, you have to eat potatoes. I don't want potatoes. A bowl of cereal. Right, and then they want to be stupid and like, oh, okay, so we'll just let them eat whatever they want, even if it's a bowl of rocks. Then they'll wind up dying and in the hospital for eating rocks. Right, you're just dealing with that kind of stupidity, right? Yeah, I know. So, yeah, it's good discussions to have. I mean, I'm not really sure what brought us down that path. The band, Beyond Recovery. Former greatness, David and Solomon, and the fortune to live during the declining period of this great civilization. And at the other end, the coast road ran across to the northern end of the basin of the rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, the second great cradle of civilizations in the Middle East. The Tigris and Euphrates both rise in the mountains of what is now Turkey, and in ancient times a network of irrigation canals connected to the two rivers made Mesopotamia famous for its agriculture, but unlike Egypt, it was not easily defended. The long mountain chain which stretches from Turkey to the Indian Ocean harbored fiercely independent tribes, and the passes through the mountains permitted migrants to flood through from the eastern steppes beyond the Caspian Sea. The occupants of Mesopotamia had to be on constant guard, and it is not surprising that the history of the area is the rise and fall of power after power. Somewhere about 1700 BC, the Babylonian king Hammurabi conquered the Assyrians, destroyed Mari in the north, subjugated the ancient Sumerians with their capital of Ur in the south, and brought all the Mesopotamia under one rule. The prologue to the Code of Law, which he promulgated and enforced, sets out his achievements and the prosperity he brought to his people, reviving places which had declined, rebuilding ruins, and making irrigation and watering places to bring new areas under civilization. The ancient seed of royalty, the powerful king, son of Babylon, who causes light to go forth over the lands of Sumer and Akkad. The king who had made the four corners of the world subservient, the favorite of Anai am I. When Marduk commissioned me to guide the people aright, to direct the land, I established the law and justice in the language of the land, promoting the welfare of the people. But for all his greatness, the prosperity Hammurabi created barely survived his death. But for all his greatness, the prosperity Hammurabi created barely survived his death, for a wave of migration swept over Mesopotamia, and Babylon fell before it. Out of the succeeding years of chaos, a new Assyria arose, and for a brief span of a little over 100 years, the Assyrian power was supreme. But the slow pressure of the migrating peoples, forced through the mountains by the mass of moving tribes behind them, in turn forced the Assyrians back, and although they retained control of their homeland in the upper reaches of the Tigris around Nabia and Ashur, they no longer dominated Syria and Palestine. Palestine was sealed off from Mesopotamia by Semitic people. The Armenians, immigrants who dominated the area north of Palestine at the time, as the peoples of the sea, were trying to take over southern Palestine and Egypt. The Armenians established small independent states at Aleppo,
Hamath, and Damascus, and although they were none of them very strong, their combined presence and their vague Semitic relationship with the Hebrews was enough to protect Palestine from Assyria. The only serious threat to the Hebrews as they infiltrated the Canaanites and by marriage or battle took over the Jordan Valley and the hills to the west of it came from the same peoples of the sea who frightened Egypt so badly. They settled on the coastal plain in a loose federation of 5 cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath, and succeeded for a time in making the Hebrews their subjects. As the Philistines, they figure largely in the stories of Saul and David. But the very fact that so insignificant a people occupy so important a place in the biblical histories only shows how free the Hebrews were. If Egypt or Assyria had been able to spare time and energy to make their weight felt, neither the Philistines nor the Hebrews would have had any independence. The complex balance of powers and the geographical position of the Jordan Valley provided a small area of comparative calm for the Hebrews, so they could concentrate on the danger from the coastal plain to the west of them, where the Philistines had settled. East of the Jordan were the petty kingdoms of Edom, Moab, and Ammon, and then the impassable Syrian desert. The desert was formidable even to a people who used the recently domesticated camel, a territory where the most recent maps of our own times peter out into large blank areas with the word unsurveyed printed across them. The area of Palestine, which the Hebrews were eventually to occupy, was already settled by a people whose civilization had once filled the whole area between Egypt and Mesopotamia. But conquest first by the Egyptians and then, at least along the coast, by the peoples of the sea, and pressure from successive waves of migration had weakened the Canaanites until they were in no position to offer effective resistance to the incoming Hebrews. In any case, their way of life was agricultural and city-centered, concentrated mainly in the fertile valleys, while the Hebrews were people with a nomadic tradition. At first, at least, the incoming Hebrew people would infiltrate into the hilly parts, where they would find ample pasturage for their sheep and goats. In the very early stages, they were not competing with the existing inhabitants for the agricultural areas, though that competition would quickly come, and their penetration lapped round the main Canaanite centers. We have been left a vivid picture of life and conditions in Canaan in the years before the Hebrews arrived, through the letters which have been discovered from local Canaanite kings to the Egyptian pharaohs. Egypt controlled the area at the time, and there was clearly an extensive correspondence involved in the administration and exploitation of Palestine. The country was divided between a number of small city-states, each with a central walled stronghold with its huddle of houses sheltering behind the fortifications. The foundation patterns of the parts that have been excavated show large differences between the sizes of the houses, clear indications that there was a wide range of social classes living within the cities. Each city controlled an area of cultivated land around it, but the people tending the land would return to the safety of the city at night, except perhaps during the intensive work of the harvests. Occasionally a city would have smaller, fortified daughter cities under the rule of its king. Altogether, the picture is not unlike Greece some 600 years later. Between the cities there was a constantly shifting pattern of enmity, alliance, suspicion, and distrust. Egypt's interest in the area was generated by its position on the only practical route between Egypt and the north. For reasons both of defense and of trade, she was concerned that there should be comparative peace there, and she installed officials and small, scattered garrisons of soldiers to guard her interest. In their turn, the local kings wrote to Egypt reporting, complaining, and asking for help. About 150 years before the Hebrews arrived, the king of Megiddo wrote urgently to the pharaoh Akhenaton, father of Tutankhamun. Let the king know that ever since the archers returned to Egypt, Labu, king of Sheshkem, has carried on hostilities against me, and we are not able to pluck the wool, and we are not able to go outside the gate in the presence of Labu, since he learned that thou hast not given archers, and now his face is set to take Megiddo. But let the king protect his city, lest Labu seize it. Indeed, the city is destroyed from pestilence and disease. Let the king give 100 garrison troops to guard the city. Labu was killed, as a later letter tells, and the siege raised, but the pettiness of the little war is shown by the request for such a small garrison force. Labu's two sons took up their father's cause and tried again to take Megiddo and make the people turn against Egypt. One sees why the people of Megiddo found it so necessary to dig a great tunnel connecting the center of the city with the vital water spring at the foot of its walls. Sometimes the threats came from Egyptian soldiers sent as garrisons. Jerusalem had a small detachment of Egyptian army slaves stationed in the city, who even went as far as looting the palace of the king of Jerusalem. With reference to the Nubians, let my king ask the commissioners whether my house is not very strong. Yet they attempted a very great crime. They took their implements and breached the roof. If troops are sent into the land, let them come with a regular Egyptian officer, for all the lands are impoverished by them. And let my king requisition for them much grain, much oil, and much clothing, until the royal commissioner comes. The problem of who was to provide for the needs of troops stationed abroad was not just a modern one. The local Egyptian officials themselves were not above squeezing what they could out of the Canaanites. The king of Gezer, a little to the west of Jerusalem, wrote to the pharaoh asking for help against the Egyptian governor of Palestine. Let the king, my lord, know the deed which Yanhamu did to me after I left the presence of the king, my lord. He seeks 2,000 shekels of silver from my land, saying to me, Give me thy wife and thy children, or I will smite. Let the king know this deed, and let my lord send chariots to me, and let him take me to himself, lest I perish. There are even letters about an Egyptian governor who was in revolt against the pharaoh and had tried to turn the whole area against Egypt. Migrant groups moving into the area from the semi-desert regions to the east were another source of trouble, and local kings appealed for troops to help resist their encroaches. These people are referred to as Aparu, and they may have been members of the same semi-nomad peoples to whom the Hebrews belonged. The threat was sufficient to force the Canaanite kings, normally at war with each other, into alliances. Let the king, my lord, learn that the chief of the Aparu has risen against the lands which the God of the king, my lord, gave me, but I smitten him. Zerata, king of Achio, and Indurata, king of Akshpa, hastened with 50 chariots, for I had been robbed by the Aparu to my help. It was Canaanite chariots, light horse-drawn vehicles of wood strengthened with iron, which struck such fear into the Hebrews when they met them in battle. There are more peaceful glimpses in the letters of the trade which originated in the area or passed through it on its way to Egypt. A copy of a letter from the Egyptian pharaoh to the king of Gezer lists the goods he is is to collect, ready for the Egyptian commissioner when he arrives. Behold, I am sending to thee Hanya, the commissioner of the archers, together with goods, in order to procure fine concubines, weaving women, silver, gold, linen, garments, turquoise, precious stones, chairs of ebony, as well as every good thing, totaling 160 deban, total 40 concubines. The price of each concubine is 40 shekels of silver, so send very good concubines in whom there is no blemish. It is more than probable that the king of Gezer was not above attaining the goods for Egypt by robbing his fellow kings, for there is a letter from the king of Jerusalem complaining that he had sent off a caravan to Egypt with slaves, 5,000 shekels of silver, and 8 porters, but they were all captured while passing through the territory of the king of Gezer. Shortly afterwards, Egypt lost effective control of the area, mainly because of the arrival of the peoples of the sea, but there is no reason to think that the local life of the area changed so very much, for the newcomers remained largely in the coastal plains until, as the Philistines, they tried to control the central highlands and the Jordan Valley and were defeated and confined by David. The Hebrews would find a people in possession of the land who could have been formidable if they had been united amongst themselves, for their war techniques with iron chariots and heavily fortified cities were far superior to anything the Hebrews had. It is possible also that the feudal social structure of the Canaanite cities, where the king virtually owned his land and people and ruled over a carefully stratified society, made for a more efficient army organization than the Hebrews with their loosely organized tribes. The city life of the Canaanites was to have a profound effect on the Hebrews, particularly after the consolidation of the nation's unity and the development of city life under David and Solomon, and the extent of the dangers of Canaanite influences on the Hebrews at the social level are vividly expressed by an anti-royalist account of the election of Saul to be first of the Hebrew kings. This particular vision shows Samuel warning the people of the consequences of their request for a king, and it is clear that this reflects the character of Canaanite kingship. These will be the rights of the king who is to reign over you. He will take your sons to assign them to his chariotry and cavalry, and they will run in front of his chariot. He will use them as leaders of 1,000 and leaders of 50. He will make them plow his plowland and harvest his harvest and make his weapons of war and the gear for his chariots. He will also take your daughters as perfumers, cooks, and bakers. He will take the best of your fields, of your vineyards, and olive groves, and give them to his officials.
What does that mean? Has perfumes on? Do they love their lovely scents? Well, some say they would use them as bait when they would have their menstrual cycles. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different, probably, utilizations for the same perfume, right? Let's see. He will take the best of your manservants and midservants, of your cattle and your donkeys, and make them work for him. He will tithe your flocks, and yourself will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out on an account of the king you have chosen for yourselves. In view of the revolt which followed Solomon's reigns, it is very probable that this situation was reached very quickly. Yet the most profound dangers were to be found not in the social life of the Hebrews, but in their religious life, and this danger was all the greater through the way in which the Hebrew people came to occupy the area. And their occupation, if their occupation had been a thoroughgoing and swift military conquest, as the book of Joshua presents it,
They would have been more likely to reject everything Canaanite from the beginning, but it was not so. To a very large extent, they mixed with the Canaanites, learned their techniques, and found their religion all too attractive. The Israelites lived among the Canaanites and Hittites and Amorites and Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. They married the daughters of these peoples, gave their own daughters in marriages to their sons, and served their gods. This seems a more likely account of the situation, for it is clear that there were important sections of the area, including Jerusalem and its district, which were still under Canaanite control until the time of David. The challenge of the native religions and the assimilation of the religious experience which had produced them was to be a most important factor in the development of the Hebrews' own faith as they explored the character of God who had chosen them and brought them from Egypt to Canaan. You might like to consider what form changes in religious practices and statements of belief can take without betraying the truth which they claim to be preserving. You might like to consider what form changes in religious practices and statements of belief. What form change? I'm trying to read this. What form changes in religious practices and statements of belief See, if it said what form changes can take place in religious practices and statements, it would suffice. Anyways, what form changes in religious practices and statements of belief can take without betraying the truth which they claim to be preserving? What form changes in religious practices and statements of belief can take without betraying the truth which they claim to be preserving? All right, and then we'll pause there. Page 23, chapter 2 is next. The people of the covenant. Yeah, we'll read some more later. I gotta go refill my water. I drank my whole water while I was reading. You're welcome. Nice, thank you. $58.36. I did it under an hour. Yeah, plus in the beginning there was stuff playing, so someone bet it would take me over an hour to get through chapter 1. So we got some other stuff in there too. I could have read it faster. Well, sometimes, I'm also doing stretching and breathing exercises, or just kind of shaking my feet. Yeah. All right. Yeah, it is 2:49 in the afternoon here. Thank you so much. I hope you know that we do see and appreciate so many people that, have recognized, what's real and the truth and trying to do what's right, overall for humanity.
Oh, we're just speaking for ourselves. We're just saying there's just an appreciation. Not that they're doing anything for us personally, just as a human being. And you see what's been going on and how so many people are hanging on with their sanity. My gosh. It's just, I go into tears just even beginning to think about what a lot of them and their families have been through, and so many that, haven't made it or killed, tortured. You hear all these different things. Granted, some of them may be doctored in some way. Right, you have people that disappear all the time who are still alive, witness protection, different things like that, yeah. Yeah, that happens. But yeah, so many, it doesn't mean you can turn your head and just cast them all off as that, especially if it pertains to a situation you don't want to ignore. People will just assume it's all cotton candy. Spike! Right. Alright, so yeah, we'll do some more reading in a little bit. I am going to probably make a tea. I didn't make a tea earlier. I ended up doing a Celsius, and I just had 2 waters. I drank a whole one just while we were reading that. Probably, let's see, this thing is, I don't know how many ounces this is. If I had to guess the ounces on this, probably 24. 20 maybe. Alright.